For half a century, Jack Nicholson wore the most dangerous smile in Hollywood. That crooked grin could sell madness, charm, or murder, sometimes all at once. To the public, he was effortless rebellion. To those who worked with him, unpredictable fire. Directors called him brilliant. Co-stars called him impossible. He thrived on tension, pushed scenes past the script, and never shied from confrontation. Because for every film that made him a legend, there was another that left scars, arguments, or silence. Some were creative battles, some became personal, and some changed the course of his career. At 87, the man who once ruled Hollywood from behind, a grin left behind a trail of stories, of partnerships that exploded, friendships that soured, and lessons that cost him more than fame. The first was a woman whose brilliance matched his, and whose defiance destroyed his greatest dream. Number 1. Faye Dunaway, the co-star who destroyed his dream. In 1990, Jack Nicholson set out to do the impossible: direct, write, and star in the sequel to Chinatown, the film that had once defined him. The project was The Two Jakes, and to Jack, it wasn't just a movie, it was redemption. He wanted to prove he could build a masterpiece from chaos, to show that the same wild energy that fueled his performances could create order behind the camera. And then came Faye Dunaway. She had been the face of Chinatown. Cool, complicated, dangerous. A star cut from the same volatile fabric as Jack himself. But what began as reunion quickly turned to combat. Crew members would later say the tension on set was almost physical, as if the air thickened whenever they shared the same frame. Faye was meticulous. Jack was instinctive. Every take became a battle of control. She questioned his direction, rewrote her lines, and at times refused to come out of her trailer until scenes were changed. Nicholson, who had faced mobsters, madness, and Kubrick himself, found himself undone by an argument over camera angles. "Collaboration," he once said, "only works when you're on the same side of the fire." With Faye, there wasn't one fire, there were two. And they were burning in opposite directions. On the set, cigarette smoke hung heavy. Scripts littered the floor like confetti from a party that never started. Every decision seemed to take twice as long. Faye's lateness drove him mad. His temper drove her to ice. Their arguments weren't loud. They were surgical, delivered with the kind of calm that feels worse than shouting. Crew members whispered that Jack's smile had disappeared long before the cameras started rolling. Weeks turned into months. The film's budget ballooned, tempers frayed, and the production began collapsing under its own weight. At one point, Dunaway walked off set entirely, and Nicholson, the man who'd spent his whole career defying authority, was now the one begging for cooperation. He had poured everything into The Two Jakes: his money, his reputation, his pride. But as the project crumbled, so did his patience. When the film was finally released, years late and half-broken, critics called it confused, lifeless, and haunted by ghosts of greatness. Nicholson never directed again. For years, he avoided talking about it. When pressed, he'd simply shake his head and say, "It wasn't meant to happen." But everyone who knew him understood what that meant. The failure wasn't just professional, it was personal. He had built the film as a monument to control, to show that chaos could be tamed. Instead, it reminded him that the very fire that made him brilliant could also burn everything down. In later years, Dunaway would call him a true artist, and he in turn would praise her talent in interviews. But behind those polite words was silence, the kind that only exists between people who once saw too much of themselves in each other. For Jack Nicholson, The Two Jakes wasn't just a movie that failed, it was a mirror. And when he looked into it, he saw every piece of his own volatility staring back. But if Faye's fire had left him scorched, the next encounter would leave him cold. Proof that even the man he once called a god could crumble when the lights came on. Number 2. Marlon Brando, the idol who fell from grace. In 1976, Jack Nicholson got the call every actor of his generation dreamed about. Marlon Brando, the benchmark of American screen acting, would share top billing with him in the Missouri Breaks. For Nicholson, it wasn't just a credit, it was a coronation. He'd grown up on Brando's revolutions. Streetcar, on the waterfront, the thunderclap of The Godfather. Now he'd finally test himself against the source. The first rehearsal cut the fantasy in half. Brando arrived late, distracted, heavier than expected, working from cue cards taped to lamps, chairs. Even, crew members whispered, to a forehead when the angle allowed. Lines drifted, accents drifted, an Irish lilt surfaced and vanished without warning. Costumes changed on whims that no one could trace back to character. The set felt less like a Western than a moving target. Nicholson, by contrast, came in tight and ready. Script marked, beats chosen, a dozen options in his pocket. He wanted the duel he'd spent years imagining, two heavyweights trading blows until the scene bled truth. What he got instead was a kind of surreal scavenger hunt, chasing coherence around Brando's improvisations. On paper, it sounds like freedom, the kind of chaos Nicholson often thrived in. But there's a difference between risk and drift. Risk sharpens a scene, drift dissolves it. After the third or fourth take where Brando's eyeline wandered to find the cue card, you could see something tighten in Nicholson's jaw. Respect didn't vanish in a single moment. It leaked out, take by take, like air from a tire. The crew learned small survival rituals. Reset the lamp, shift the tape, build the frame wide so the search looks like thinking. Nicholson learned a different one. Protect the spine of the scene no matter how the edges fray. He trimmed his flourishes, grounded his eye lines, gave the camera a clear thread to follow so the picture wouldn't lose its center. It worked, and it cost him. You can hold a roof up for so long before your arms shake. Box office returns were modest. Reviews called the film uneven, interesting in pieces, baffling as a whole. Nicholson didn't issue denouncements or thunder in interviews. He simply stopped pretending the experience had been what he dreamed. The lesson he kept was colder and cleaner. Genius without discipline turns into debris, and debris is what other people have to sweep. Was Brando still capable of brilliance? Of course. Even on that set, flashes cut through. A glance, a muttered line that suddenly rang like a bell. But the bell didn't ring on command anymore, and films are built on repetition. Hit your mark, find the note, do it again. Nicholson wasn't angry at a god, he was grieving the loss of gravity. Years later, when people asked him about working with Brando, Nicholson would smile, that half smile that made reporters lean forward. He'd give a graceful sentence, a respectful nod to the legend. But the truth sat quieter. The day your hero stops taking the work seriously is the day you outgrow worship. He never badmouthed the legend, but he also never chased another set with him. Some partnerships end not in scandal, but in refusal. From the god he couldn't steady, Nicholson moved to a set where steadiness itself became a weapon, and an actress whose unraveling would haunt him long after the cameras stopped. Number 3. Shelley Duvall, the breakdown he couldn't forget. From the chaos of the Missouri breaks, Nicholson walked straight into another. Only this time, the storm wasn't caused by ego or laziness. It was born out of fear. In 1980, Stanley Kubrick cast him in The Shining, a film that would redefine horror and turn Nicholson's grin into something mythic. But what the audience saw as genius, the manic eyes, the twisted smile, came at a cost that never made it into the credits. Shelley Duvall wasn't built for Kubrick's cruelty. She was fragile, deliberate, and honest, the kind of actress who trembled her way into truth. Kubrick wanted to break that truth apart on camera. He made her repeat the same lines over 100 times. He isolated her from the crew. He demanded panic until her tears were no longer performance but survival. Nicholson stood on the other side of the madness, watching a co-star unravel take by take. At first, he treated it like a challenge, the perfect counterpoint to his own intensity. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to tell where performance ended and cruelty began. Between takes, Duvall would sit alone, holding her head, hands shaking. She later said that her hair started falling out during filming, the body keeping count of every scream. Nicholson never interfered with Kubrick's methods. He respected the director too much to question him. But in interviews years later, you can hear the hesitation, a kind of quiet guilt wrapped in professionalism. He once said, "As an actor, you need a dance partner." With Shelley, it felt like she was hearing a different song. What he didn't say was that Kubrick had changed the music altogether. It was chaos turned into art, and it worked. The Shining became one of the most celebrated horror films ever made, and Nicholson's performance became immortal. But it also became the film Shelley Duvall never truly escaped. Her voice trembled whenever she spoke about it decades later in rare interviews, how she'd been pushed until she stopped recognizing herself. And though Nicholson rarely revisited the topic, those who knew him said he carried the memory like a bruise, visible only when pressed. He was an actor who thrived on danger, but what he saw on that set wasn't danger, it was damage. For the first time in his career, the chaos that fueled him left someone else broken. Kubrick called it method, critics called it mastery. Nicholson could admire the result and still hate the way it was made. He didn't resent her, he resented the work turning into harm, a pairing he wouldn't seek again. Because brilliance is only beautiful until you see what it costs to make it. And after witnessing fragility shatter, he ran into the opposite problem, a partner so perfectly sealed that there was no oxygen left for danger. Number 4. Tom Cruise, the machine he couldn't crack. If The Shining had shown Nicholson what it meant to watch someone fall apart, his next clash showed him the opposite, what it felt like to act beside someone who never broke at all. In 1992, A Few Good Men paired Jack Nicholson with Tom Cruise, the new golden boy of Hollywood. Cruise was disciplined, immaculate, and frighteningly focused. He approached acting like a science, every smile calculated, every step mapped out. For Nicholson, whose performances lived and died on instinct, that kind of control was both admirable and unbearable. On set, the contrast was electric. Cruise arrived early, lines memorized, gestures planned down to the angle of his chin. Nicholson came alive only once the cameras rolled, throwing himself into the scene, searching for the unexpected beat, the crack where truth might leak through. To Cruise, that was chaos. To Nicholson, that was art. Their showdown in the courtroom was supposed to be pure chemistry, the hungry young lawyer against the hardened colonel. What it became was a collision of two acting philosophies. Cruise delivered his lines with precision, never missing a cue. Nicholson answered with fire, daring him to lose control. You could feel the tension behind every exchange. Not just character versus character, but instinct versus image. When Cruise shouted, "I want the truth," Nicholson's reply wasn't rehearsed. He let the rage hit full force. "You can't handle the truth." It became one of the most famous lines in movie history, a cultural echo of two men playing completely different games. After the film's release, Nicholson praised Cruise's professionalism and meant it. But privately, he found the experience hollow. He once told a friend that acting beside Cruise felt like dancing with a mirror, everything perfect, nothing dangerous. The young star's precision left no room for risk, no oxygen for spontaneity. To Nicholson, that was the death of what made acting worth doing. He didn't hate Cruise as a man, he hated what Cruise represented, a new Hollywood built on polish, not pulse. Where Nicholson once thrived on chaos, the industry now demanded control. "It's beautiful," he said of the modern method, "but it's air-conditioned." For him, A Few Good Men was both a triumph and a warning, proof that the art form he loved was changing into something he no longer recognized. He'd fought ego, worship, and fragility. What came next wasn't perfection, it was control. And control was the one thing he'd never learned to obey. Number 5. Sean Penn, the director who tried to control him. By the time Nicholson reached his 60s, he'd spent decades dodging control. Directors had learned to give him space, to let the unpredictability breathe. Then, in 2001, Sean Penn called with a script that promised truth, pain, and finality. The film was The Pledge, and Penn wanted Nicholson not as the legend, but as a man at the end of his rope. At first, it sounded perfect. A quiet detective story, a fading conscience. Nicholson could sink into that. But what began as collaboration slowly tightened into constraint. Penn was no rookie by then. He'd studied directing the way a soldier studies maps, obsessed with terrain, precision, and control. He storyboarded every pause, every line, every glance. Nicholson admired the passion, but on set, it felt like someone had fenced off the wilderness he'd always roamed. He tried to improvise, shift tone, play with the silence between words. Penn would stop him. "Do it exactly as planned," he'd say. And Jack, the man who had built an entire career out of tearing up plans, felt the walls closing in. Crew members later said you could sense it in his body language, a lion pacing inside an invisible cage. Nicholson delivered each take perfectly, but the joy that usually cracked through his eyes was gone. Penn wanted the character broken. Nicholson felt the process breaking him instead. He once muttered to a friend, "Why hire Jack Nicholson if you want a puppet?" It was less insult than despair, an artist realizing his instincts no longer belonged to him. The irony was cruel. The Pledge turned out beautiful. Critics called it haunting, restrained, one of Nicholson's most mature performances. But behind that restraint was a man fighting to breathe. He'd always said acting should feel dangerous, alive, improvised. Penn's precision stripped away the danger, replacing it with control disguised as artistry. When the film wrapped, Nicholson shook Penn's hand, smiled for the cameras, and quietly swore he'd never work under that kind of direction again. He respected Penn's talent, but hated the leash that came with it. For a man who'd spent his life breaking boundaries, the experience felt like a rehearsal for retirement. And maybe that was the real pledge. Not the one written in the script, but the one he made to himself. Never again would he trade freedom for perfection. But even that promise wouldn't last, because his final great collaboration would test whether freedom itself had gone extinct, replaced by a new generation too careful, too protected, too safe to ever frighten him again. Number 6, Leonardo DiCaprio, the successor who played it safe. By 2006, Jack Nicholson was Hollywood royalty. Every set he walked onto felt like a homecoming and a funeral at the same time. The industry he had once ruled was changing around him. So when Martin Scorsese offered him a role in The Departed, Nicholson didn't hesitate. The script was violent, smart, and alive, everything he loved about movies. The only question was whether he could still set a screen on fire in a world built for younger men. His co-star was Leonardo DiCaprio, the most disciplined actor of his generation, a perfectionist raised in a Hollywood Nicholson barely recognized. Leo was brilliant in his own way, technical, intense, precise. But to Jack, he was too safe. Every movement felt studied, every line rehearsed to death. Nicholson used to say that acting should feel like walking a tightrope without a net. DiCaprio, he joked, brought a safety harness and a mat, and then told everyone it was bravery. During filming, Nicholson decided to test the boundaries. In one scene, he pulled a real gun out of his pocket without warning. Scorsese kept rolling. DiCaprio's shock was real. For Jack, that was the point. Truth caught off guard. But to Leo, it was reckless. He called it terrifying, and you can still see the fear in his eyes in the final cut. Afterward, they remained professional, but the gap was obvious. DiCaprio represented a new Hollywood that valued precision over instinct, image over danger. Nicholson could admire the craft and still hate the comfort that came with it. He missed the mess, the imperfection, the chance to fail spectacularly. When reporters asked him about Leo, he smiled and called him a great kid. But in private, friends said he was restless. He felt like the last of his kind, a man from an era where you didn't rehearse fear, you invited it. He once told a colleague, "The camera can't catch you if you're hiding behind discipline." The Departed won Best Picture. DiCaprio became Scorsese's new muse. Nicholson retreated to his house on Mulholland Drive, half proud, half haunted. He'd proven he could still steal a scene, but the cost was the same as it had always been. He couldn't share one without trying to set it on fire. He didn't hate DiCaprio. He hated what the world had turned acting into. A craft once built on risk was now built on control. A generation that used to chase truth was now trained to avoid it. When shooting ended, he left the set without farewell, quietly closing the door on the only thing he'd ever loved enough to fight. And as the younger men inherited the stage lights, the old rebel finally learned how to fade to black. 6 names, 6 lessons, each one a mirror, showing Jack Nicholson not just the people he clashed with, but the pieces of himself he could never quite control. He didn't set out to hate anyone, but on every set, there came a moment when admiration curdled into exhaustion, when talent crossed the line into ego, or discipline hardened into control. He loved the craft too much to tolerate what diluted it. And that, more than temper or pride, was what made him impossible. Faye Dunaway tested his power. Marlon Brando tested his faith. Shelley Duvall tested his empathy. Tom Cruise tested his patience. Sean Penn tested his freedom. And Leonardo DiCaprio tested his legacy. 6 collaborations that became confessions, each revealing a truth he didn't want to see, that the wildness Hollywood once celebrated was quietly being erased. In his later years, Nicholson withdrew from the spotlight. No farewell interviews, no long speeches, just silence. The kind that comes when a man has already said everything he needed to on film. He watched the industry he helped build become colder, safer, smaller. The chaos was gone. The fire was contained. And maybe that was the real tragedy of his time. Not that he'd been difficult, but that he'd been right. Because genius doesn't survive in comfort. It needs friction, danger, and the threat of collapse. And when those things disappeared, so did the kind of performances that made him who he was. Decades passed, and Hollywood changed again. Streaming, franchises, algorithms deciding what stories deserve to exist. But through it all, his name stayed untouched, spoken with that same mix of fear and reverence. Because everyone in the business knew you could copy his lines, but you couldn't copy his fire. He outlived his rivals, his heroes, and the very system that created him. And when the world finally went quiet, all that remained was that crooked grin, half mad, half wise, a reminder that Hollywood may forget its legends, but its rebels never fade quietly.